The other technique that I use for salmon is eggs underneath a float. It's a very effective way to fish. It's not as exciting as fishing a lure. You don't get those hard strikes when a salmon takes eggs. It's very much like a perch bite. Your float just kind of taps a few times and slowly goes under, which it doesn't seem like it would happen that way with a 20-pound fish, but that's how it works. And quite frankly, watching a bobber go underneath the water never gets old. The the instinct that you're really working on with the salmon with eggs is their sense of smell, their scent. You know, it poses no threat. It's just something that smells good and they can't resist it. A lot of people, like I said before, don't think salmon bite. They do. If you let a salmon have the eggs that you're fishing long enough, every time you hook them, your hook will be in their stomach. They will swallow the eggs. For what reason? Nobody knows. Some people say it's for competition. You know, they're trying to kill the young of another salmon. I believe it's just with the cure that we use and a lot of guys use, it just smells so good to them that they honestly can't resist it. This is the cure that you want to use when fishing with salmon eggs. People can tell you fresh eggs are the best, that's the only way to go. For salmon, it's not. Steelhead and brown, sure, you know, fresh eggs are definitely one of the best ways to fish. But salmon, you can fish fresh eggs, not get a hit all day long. But if you're using, you know, something that's cured, you'll catch fish every other cast. I've seen it before. I've seen it happen. I've been there. I've done it. By far the best cure on the market right now. Every guide in New York that fishes skein or eggs for salmon is using it. It's Pautzke's cure, the BorX of fire. They do have other types, but this is the main style that you use. It does cure the eggs a little bit, but at the same time, I don't know the formula that they use, but the scent that their mixture adds to your eggs and your bait is second to none. I mean, this stuff just drives the salmon crazy. I've seen fish move 10 to 15 feet through the water to come over and just suck these eggs in like they were bluegills eating a worm. I mean, this is what you'd want to use. As far as curing the eggs, if you're using skein, I cut chunks about the size of a golf ball. You know, don't go small, but don't go too big. And what I'll do is I'll take a gallon Ziploc bag, pour this cure in the bottom of the bag, throw a layer of eggs in, pour the cure over top of those eggs, throw another layer of eggs in, pour the cure over top, another layer until it's full. Once it's full, you mix the eggs around a little bit so the cure touches all of them, and just throw it in the refrigerator if you plan on fishing with it in the next month or two. If you don't plan on it, using it quickly, and you want to save a bag for next year, just throw it in the freezer and let it go. There are two styles of floats to use when fishing eggs for salmon or steelhead. One is a slip float. These work great when fishing deep water, or you have a rod that's not long enough to cast out a rig. Say you have an 8-foot rod and you're trying to fish 12 feet of water. It's very difficult, nearly impossible to do that. A slip float works great for fishing that way because you can use a 5-foot rod and cast into water that's 20 feet deep and fish effectively. The other style is a fixed float, which is, this is a Raven float where you use surgical tubing to keep the line on the stem. This is great for, you know, all around fishing in shallower water, or again, if you use a longer rod and can cast a longer leader and rig, you know, these work perfectly fine. Rigging up a slip float is fairly easy. Again, you would use a slip float in deeper water, where again, if you're fishing a 10-foot rod and you need to fish about 12 feet down, it makes it very simple to cast out. The first thing you do is get a bobber stop. It's 20-pound nylon or Dacron backing that fly fishermen use on a piece of tubing. You take your line, I don't know if you can see that very well, but you take your fluorocarbon line, your mono, whatever you use. I prefer 12-pound fluorocarbon for my main line. and you would slip that line through that tubing. When you pull it through, you slide that knot off of the tubing, and I'm going to use my teeth to pull it off. Pull the tubing off the line, and you have that knot that you just pull tight. And you're going to pull it as tight as you can. You want that knot to be on there, on the line, and you want it to hold strong. What you would do at this point is cut these two tag ends of the knot off so it's smooth. The reason for that is if you are fishing deeper water, you might have to reel that knot onto your spinning reel, and the smoother and smaller that knot is, the easier it is to cast. If there's little tags hanging out, all it's going to do is cause you a backlash or a bird's nest. From there, you take a bead, which is fairly small, and you slide that onto your line. After the bead is on the line, you take your slip float and you would put that on. And with how these are, there's a tube that goes directly through the float. You push your line through, pull it out the other side. At this point, you would tie on a swivel for your leader. And I'm using a giant saltwater swivel just for the purpose of seeing it. Once you get that swivel tied on, you would again bite that tag off. And I will not throw a leader on here now, but I will show you how it works. When your line is reeled up and you're ready to cast, because as bobber slides, it's going to slide down to that swivel. Well, when it's at that swivel, you can reel your rod tip up right where my fingers are at, bring your rod back and cast out. When it hits the water, the weight of your bait and the split shot will pull your line down, and it's going to pull it down with the bead until that bobber stop hits the bead and then stops it against the float. That bobber stop won't be able to go through that bead, and of course the float is going to get stuck on the bead and you are all rigged up. So this is why it's effective to fish 20 feet of water, because your leader between your swivel and your bait might be 3 feet. You reel it up, you cast it out, let it sink down, and you can fish as deep as you want. It's a very easy way to fish in deep water for salmon. Now with the other way to fish for salmon with a float, with a fixed float, is a little bit different. I'm going to pull the surgical tubing off the stems of the float first. And how to rig this up is you take your main line, you would go ahead and slide the first piece of surgical tubing over top of it. And that piece would end up on the top of the float. So you don't want the surgical tubing to be too long, but you want it long enough to grip your line against most of the float. Now your next two pieces are for the bottom stem, which is a little bit longer, so you can go a little bit longer on the surgical tubing to provide a little bit more of a grip so your float does not slide. I like to use one piece on the top, two pieces on the bottom, and I'll show you in a minute why I do that. So you have 3 pieces of surgical tubing on your line. You would take your float and push the stem inside that top piece, and your line is coming off right at the tip of the float. You would take the top piece, or the middle piece of surgical tubing, put that on the bottom stem first, and you would slide that the whole way up to the bottom of the float. And you see that slack line in there, you want to pull that out. What that does, it keeps your float and line as one. It's smooth, the line's not going to be hanging off and causing extra drag in the water. The drag causes an unnatural float, and a lot of fish get turned off by it. And if you can see the bottom piece, how the line is not down to the tip of the float or the bottom of the float, that is where I take that second piece and put it right at the bottom. So it is a perfectly straight rig. The line is not angled in any manner that would cause any type of drag or an unnatural drift. From this point, just like the last time, you would tie on your swivel, Get that rigged up, and then you would tie on your leader. Now with a leader and the distance that you fish with a float, from here I would tie on a little bit lighter leader, about 10-pound test. And the reason is floats aren't cheap. You know, they're $2 or $3 a pop, and a lot of days when I'm fishing for salmon with floats and bobbers, I'm hooking 50, 60 salmon. And if you're using a 12-pound mainline, 12-pound leader, you know, your line very might well break above your float. So if you're hooking 50 or 60 fish and you break 30 of them off at $3 a pop for a float, it's a lot of money. So use a lighter lighter leader than your main line, just for the fact that if you do break off, you're only losing a hook and a split shot. I don't put my split shot generally above my swivel. I like to keep it below the swivel on that lighter line, so if your split shot does get hung up on the bottom, if you're fishing deep, it's going to break off the leader instead of losing your float again. The leader length is dependent on, you know, the flow of the water, how fast or slow it is, but a general rule of thumb with fishing a float for salmon is you want about a 3-foot leader from the swivel to your hook. If you're fishing quicker water, you take your split shot and you put it closer to the bait. If you are fishing slower water, you want your split shot a little bit further away so it doesn't drag to the bottom and get hung up. You know, the eggs drift at a natural pace with the current. You know, they're not just dragging along the bottom, they're kind of rolling and bouncing up in the water column a little bit and floating along. That's exactly what you want to present the fish with. The hooks I use for salmon are nothing special. They are an octopus style hook with a needle point. They're not huge, they're a size 1. When the salmon start to change before they enter the river, the gum line of the salmon actually retracts around the teeth a little bit. So their teeth are exposed, there's more bone around their mouth that's exposed. You have a lot less area of actually hooking the fish with. So a little bit smaller hook definitely makes driving it in easier if you do hook them around the jaw instead of in the corner of the mouth, or, you know, down inside the mouth. And a size 1 is plenty strong enough to land a salmon with 10 or 12-pound test fluorocarbon line. And the hooks I use are just a standard Eagle Claw laser sharp needle point, size 1. They're about $4 for 51 hooks, not 50, 51. And like I said, I've gone through a whole pack of these in a day fishing for salmon, and it's a lot easier on your wallet than buying Gamakatsus, which are $5 for, you know, 6 or 7 hooks. These things are super sharp. They hold up the salmon. The only thing I've ever had wrong with them is the actual tip of the hook has broken off, but that's when I've got hung up on rocks and I've actually pulled it free. I've never bent one on a salmon, and they hold up very, very well. I hope the video helped out you guys going up for salmon for the first time, and the guys that actually want to try to catch them legally. As you can see, it's very simple. There's 2 main choices that you have to fish with. The riggings are simple, and it is just 100% pure fun. The success rate when you are fishing for salmon goes through the roof. You have much better days on the water, and it is just a blast. And you do not need to look over your shoulder every 5 seconds, you know, looking for an officer trying to come down and give you a fine because you are doing something illegal. So as long as you stuck through my monotone voice and my lack of expression, I hope this helps, and good luck to everybody going out this fall. If you have any questions or need any tips, just, you know, shoot me a message, let me know, give me a reply, and I'll do my best to get back to you in a timely manner.